College football is drastically changing, but somehow Notre Dame has been able to hold firm and maintain their independence. But how long is that going to last? And what value is there in remaining independent? All that and more on today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Welcome to Locked On Irish. Today is Wednesday, August 9th, and thanks as always for making this your first listen of the day. We are free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast, but no matter how you chose to tune in to today's episode, please subscribe to the show if you have not already. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer covering college football at Fox Sports. I've also been podcasting about the Irish since 2020, and that is why I'm here with you today. This episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Today, I'm going to be joined by my good friend and former co-host Luke Smith to talk about the state of college football and Notre Dame's place amidst all the craziness that's going on. And then we'll get into some encouraging developments we've been hearing coming out of Notre Dame's fall camp. But look, we both love the Irish, obviously, but we're also huge fans of the sport of college football, and we wanted to take this opportunity to assess everything that's been going on and try to figure out what it means for the future of college football and the future of Notre Dame as well. So let's bring in Luke. All right, Luke Smith is back on the show, and we've got a lot to catch up on. It's been a busy time in college football. It's been a busy time around Notre Dame football. But let's start with the big picture look at the state of the sport right now. We're in yet another wave of conference realignment. And even though I don't think any of these moves affect Notre Dame in the short term, we both just love college football, and it's changing drastically right in front of your eyes. So how do you feel about everything that's been going on lately?
It's not that surprising in the scheme of things. However, I think how abruptly a lot of this stuff came together is probably a bit jarring. I think last Tuesday there were still reports that it's actually only going to be Arizona who's joining the Big 12, and the Pac-12 is cautiously optimistic that they're going to be okay and everybody else is sticking. And then 20 hours, actually, maybe even on Friday morning, this was still like, actually,
I think it was okay. Friday morning. Yeah.
Right. And then 3 hours later, that was not the case. Personally, I've never felt that attached to conferences in football for obvious reasons. However, I've always had a really strong respect for conferences in basketball. I think the conference tournaments are some of the most fun stuff that exists in college sports. And when you just see some of these propositions that are out there, like maybe SMU will join the ACC or Stanford, it just doesn't make any sense. And it kind of brings me back to what I think we've all known is that conferences are kind of just ambiguously drawn up boundaries or, aggregations of schools and teams for the sake of generating more revenue. But I understand that for a lot of people, conferences mean a lot. Thankfully for me, they don't mean as much, but I totally get, like, if you're an Oregon State or Washington State fan, you're kind of screwed. So I don't really know. I don't know what your next course of action is, or just how you're supposed to feel about the state of college sports, really.
I was surprised at how bummed out I was by the whole thing. I didn't really expect it. When Oklahoma and Texas moved to the SEC, I didn't really care that much. I mean, I thought it was kind of cool. And also regionally, they're already in the South, so it made sense. USC and UCLA moving to the Big Ten, I was like, that's just weird. But I still kind of got it, and I understood the move. But now, like with Oregon and Washington, the manner in which it went down, you've already mentioned it, how at one point it seemed like the Pac-12 was going to stay together and that they were actually trying to. Like the presidents and the athletic departments at all these schools were actually trying to work together for a common goal that wasn't entirely financially driven, was almost like, wow, look at this. It actually can happen. Nope, wrong. And then at the 11th hour, they end up moving to the Big Ten. And what's crazy about it all is that they're moving to the Big Ten, obviously for financial reasons, but those financial reasons really don't kick in until the end of this decade, because the money that they're going to be making during the first 7 years or so in the Big Ten is, $30 million a year, which is pretty comparable to what they could have got from the Pac-12. But due to the Pac-12's complete incompetence, lack of leadership for, over a decade since Larry Scott was in charge. We're at this point, and now the whole brand of West Coast football is pretty much gone. And personally, that was one of the things that I liked the most about college football was the regional aspect of the sport. And even though Notre Dame wasn't in a conference, I thought it was cool that like the Big Ten had their own style of play. The SEC had their own style. The Pac-12 certainly had a unique style. And now all of that is gone, and I don't really know who it benefits outside of a couple executives and some presidents at different schools.
It's also interesting because I've actually thought that the Big 12's approach to this whole thing has been very interesting because it's been centered around believing that there's still value in basketball and trying to bring – I mean, the Big 12 is already one of the best basketball conferences in the country, and I know they've had UConn on their mind, Gonzaga potentially. I thought that is very interesting, but as I've started to think about this, the SEC isn't even really at fault here in this particular instance. It's kind of the Big Ten being too greedy, and it's funny because I think if you had asked me 2-3 weeks ago, I probably would have said I really wouldn't mind if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten in the next 5 or so years. I know a lot of people are still upset about what happened with Fielding Yost like 200 years ago. I don't really care, and I don't think anybody else should. It's all those people are dead, long dead. But now that this is happening, I don't feel that I want to join the Big Ten, to be honest with you. Initially, I think I would have been okay with it because it would have been way more compelling games than this garbage ACC schedule we currently play, where all these teams stink, and it's just not very fun. So, but now it's kind of like, even though it does probably cater to Notre Dame's desire to play a national schedule with having those teams on the West Coast, it's kind of like, hey, Big Ten, you ruined this, so I don't want to join your game here now. And that's kind of where I feel, or how I feel about it. Now, will it probably happen someday down the road? Yes. But just personally, I was like, that actually turned me off on the Big Ten. Just this whole mega conference now that's just really not that appealing. And that's just sort of how I feel about it. And frankly, a lot of this stuff is annoying. The Florida State thing, I don't know who they think they are, to be honest. I know they won a national title in 2013, but they've been really bad for a while. And for them to demand that they get a larger share of the revenue in the conference, just like, kind of who the hell do you think you are? And the reality of it is, and it's funny because I've heard people in the national media claim that Florida State spends like all the other schools who are trying to win a national title. They don't have any money. That's why
Yeah.
Jimbo Fisher left. That's why they're looking for private equity funding to get out of the ACC. They are broke. So it's funny when you hear that said, and it's like, oh yeah, we want more money. Who doesn't want more money, dude? But I don't know. Just like the whole Florida State thing is another really annoying piece of this, because it's kind of just like, hey, you're not who you once were, and stop acting like you are.
Yeah, the Florida State thing is something that I'm monitoring pretty closely because I think that could be the first domino to, a long series of dominoes falling that could potentially really damage the ACC. And right now, I feel like Notre Dame is in a good spot. They still have a seat at the table at the playoff. They're going to get the NBC deal. I don't think anything like that is getting interfered with. The Olympic sports have a home, so everything is good right now. But this stuff is changing constantly. And that's actually, you already started talking about it a little bit, but I'm curious, like, how much do you value independence? Or I guess a better way to phrase that might be, how upset would you be if Notre Dame does end up joining the Big Ten? Because if Notre Dame does join a conference, it's almost certainly going to be the Big Ten.
Right. And it makes sense, right, if that were to be the case, although in this new Big Ten, it's
Big
not
20?
even the Big Ten.
Yeah, it's going to be.
I don't, as long as Notre Dame is still playing USC and frankly Michigan and a couple other big time schools a year, I don't care that much about the conference thing. I don't want to play Navy. I don't want to play Stanford. I don't care about these crap games that we can only not benefit from. And frankly, I've kind of desired to play, like, develop some more regional rivalries, play Michigan State every year. Even Wisconsin would be fun. Penn State, games like that. And so I understand why Notre Dame and people at Notre Dame value their independence. I do think it's really impressive that they've been able to kind of float above the fray and manage that for as long as they have. But I'm not as we've got to stay independent forever as everybody else. That said, I'm not going to say that right now they have to join a conference by any means because they don't. But my position on it is that I'm just not as tied to it as maybe some other people are.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. From a scheduling standpoint, I think a lot of people would enjoy the games on the schedule if Notre Dame were in the Big Ten more than the ACC, even the people who value independence the most. Like if you were just looking at it saying, hey, would you rather play North Carolina, Georgia Tech, and Wake Forest, or would you rather play Michigan State, Michigan, and Penn State, like you mentioned? Everyone would take the latter there because those games, Notre Dame does have a history with those schools, and in this new semi-marriage with the ACC, Notre Dame has certainly developed somewhat of a rivalry with Clemson, but no other school in the ACC has even come close. Like, has Notre Dame really played a really meaningful game against an ACC opponent not named Clemson other than Florida State way back in 2014? Like, it's been a really long time. So that part, scheduling, I wouldn't mind going to the Big Ten. But at this point, I'm kind of like you where I wouldn't say I've turned on the idea of joining the Big Ten, but Notre Dame's independence is one of the last bits of tradition in college football as a whole that I really care about. And with so many traditions being, thrown by the wayside, the fact that Notre Dame is independent is still pretty cool. It's one of the, last things we have left. So in a way, I feel like maybe this is just me getting older and I'm just clinging to this thing because it's the way it used to be and it's tradition. But I don't know. It still matters to me, and maybe more now than it did 3 weeks ago.
I definitely agree with that. And that is what I was trying to articulate earlier, is that the Big Ten's greed has actually kind of flipped my position. I was literally thinking about this morning. I was like, that's not as appealing as it was perhaps 2 weeks ago, because this is just kind of annoying. And maybe now I would be more inclined to want to stay independent. That said, I'm not as tied to it as some, but I totally agree with that position. You're right. It's one of the last things left that resemble what has made up the fabric of college football for so long. So it's definitely a fair stance.
So what do you think is the next domino to fall? Because even though I wouldn't say this Oregon and Washington move is directly related to Oklahoma, Texas, in a way it is, because once Oklahoma and Texas made that move to the SEC, the Big Ten had basically 2 spots to fill, and they needed to answer that move by the SEC. So they go out, they get USC and UCLA. Greg Sankey was on record today, on Tuesday, saying that the SEC is pretty content right now. They have the teams they want. They're a 16-team conference. They're not really in a hurry to expand. But now with the Big Ten adding Oregon and Washington, now they're at 18. So now they have 2 more. Even though Sankey said that, maybe he does try to go out and get 2 more teams. I don't know what 2 teams are out there. I mean, the ones that would make obvious sense are Florida State and Clemson, but due to their grant of rights deal with the ACC, I don't really see them going on the market pretty soon. I think a lot has to happen before that even becomes a possibility. So do you think that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to sort of stand pat now, and the only thing that's going to really change is that the Pac-12 loses the automatic bid and the expanded playoff?
Well, let's talk about that in a second. But I actually think that 2 schools, I don't know if they have interest in it right now, but 2 schools that would probably be better equipped to leave the ACC financially than Clemson and Florida State are North Carolina and Virginia. And they've always kind of long been tied, as if one of them was to make a move, the other would follow. So those are the 2 that I kind of have my eye on. Granted, they're also, the ACC means a lot to all those people at both of those schools. So I think that would be a last resort thing. But from what I understand, those 2 schools are in a much better position to pay that grant of rights than anybody else in that conference. So, yes, I've been wondering about the auto bid thing too. And I've done some reading on this and talked to some people. And it does sound like one of the things that's on the table now is just getting rid of the auto bids, which could be genius and could really work out for Notre Dame. But also something that if you read the fine print, what it says is the auto bids go to the top 6 highest ranked conference champions. We always just assume that would mean the Pac-12. Doesn't necessarily mean that.
That's a good point. Yeah, they never
now,
explicitly
granted,
state.
Do you think, like, I don't know, well, who knows what the Mountain West is going to be, but is a Mountain West team going to be ranked, I don't know, 20th, and they're going to get the 6 seed in the play, or the 4 seed in the playoff? I don't know, but that's just something to worth note as well.
The good thing is now that the Big Ten and the SEC are even more powerful, their commissioners are certainly going to hope and pitch that they get rid of those automatic bids so more of their teams could get in, which then opens the door for Notre Dame to get in. I know it's been thrown around a lot, and I certainly agree with this idea that we need to just break apart college football from the rest of the NCAA, create their own league, own conferences, own rules, because the people who are getting hit the worst by all of this is the student athletes who play Olympic sports who are going to have to go from Washington to Piscataway to play a softball game. Like, it's just totally unfair and unreasonable for all those people. But, I mean, honestly, do you see any chance of that happening at this point? Because someone would have to take charge and make the right decision. And I just have such little faith in the leadership in college sports right now. I just don't see that happening, even though it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, maybe when the Saudis buy the SEC and the Big Ten and Notre Dame just no longer has a football team. But,
hey,
yeah.
They had a prime opportunity to come in and save the Pac-12 and pump some money into that in a media deal and save the conference, and they missed their opportunity. So they're going to have to settle with paying Mbappe like $780 million to play soccer for 1 year. This episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by Birddogs. I've raved about Birddogs before on this podcast, and I'm here to do it again because they are just that good. Not only do they make you look better, they're way more comfortable than regular shorts that are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Birddogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. So not only can you wear these shorts to the gym, but you could wear them on the golf course, out to lunch, really wherever you want. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or enter promo code LockedOnCollege for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or use promo code LockedOnCollege for a free white tech hat. Once your shorts and hat arrive, you won't want to take them off. That's a promise. We've talked a lot about conference realignment. Let's talk a little bit about the Notre Dame football team because we've heard a lot of good things coming out of fall camp. Some of that is to be expected. Everyone's going to be optimistic this time of year. But I feel like the positives that we've heard are pretty legitimate. So what's been, the most encouraging development or developments that you've heard so far?
For me, I think the number one is just, it sounds like Cam Hart is fully healthy for the first time, and I don't know how long. And it sounds like he looks like a pro right now, which I think people kind of forget that he had a very, very strong 2021 season, and he wasn't bad last year. He just had some loud misses, so to speak. There were a couple instances that just he blew a play, blew a coverage, whatever, and those showed up. They were very visible. But if you look at his overall numbers, he still had a pretty solid year last year while playing with a messed up shoulder the entire time. So that's the number one revelation for me, because Notre Dame's cornerback room as a whole is just loaded. And if you have two guys as your starters who are legitimate pro corners, I guess, yeah, Troy Pride and Julian Love, but I don't know if I ever really thought of Troy Pride as a lockdown college corner. So it's just, that's the big one for me. That's the one I'll start with.
Yeah. The cornerbacks being not only as good as advertised, but potentially even better is quite a development, especially considering the concerns about the defensive line. But that's kind of where I want to go with my next point. It sounds like the defensive line has been pretty impressive, especially when you consider the offensive line that they're going up against every day. If they're getting some wins here and there, that says a lot, because we all have really high expectations for the Notre Dame offensive line. I'm still in like a let's wait and see kind of mode. Like, it's really encouraging to hear this stuff, but until I see Notre Dame getting after the passer against Ohio State, which we presume to be is Kyle McCord, who's going to be their quarterback, like, I'm still kind of like, all right, cautiously optimistic for sure, but that is a really encouraging development if Notre Dame is able to get after the passer and guys like, Riley Mills and Howard Cross on the interior take that next step, because we already know that they're good players, but there's certainly a lot of room for them to grow.
Right. And going into the year, there wasn't a ton of star power on this roster, defensive line, I guess, just like you kind of said there. And it's interesting because it kind of seems to be that the consensus now is this group is going to have a better year than last year's defensive line after losing a ton of production, including the all-time leading sacker in program history. That's just, it makes sense. I can buy it, but like you, I'm still a little bit in wait and see mode. Especially, it's really about showing up in the big games and not just stat padding against Central Michigan or Tennessee State. Like, show up against Clemson, USC, Ohio State. That's what I want to see.
Without a doubt. Anything on the offensive side of the ball that's been encouraging to you?
Again, I'm going to go with health here, but I think just the health, the Jadarian Price, it seemed like there was a lot of skepticism going into camp, and I would put myself in that skeptic camp that he was really fully healed. Like Marcus Freeman was saying, a lot of people, myself included, thought it might just be coach speak. It sounds like he's been full speed, though, and I think that running back room, even with the loss of Logan Diggs, is very talented and very deep, and let's face it, there's probably going to be an injury at some point during the year in that room. So just having four or five capable guys is really, really beneficial and great to hear.
Yeah, I think that's been a really positive development. I think that what we've heard about Sam Hartman has been encouraging, that he's taken full control not only of the offense, but really the entire team. The guys look up to him, which makes sense. And it goes back to something that I think you and I have talked about before, where, like, yes, we wanted Tyler Buckner to be on the team. We were both believers in him, especially for the future. But you could definitely make the case that in terms of, like, Sam Hartman becoming the clear voice of the team, that he basically needed Buckner to transfer. Like, there would have been this awkward dynamic. And even if Sam Hartman won the job, Tyler Buckner had been around the team. The guys seemed to like him. So now, with him being the main guy, obvious guy to start fall camp, he has a chance to take control. So that has been certainly a good thing. You've already mentioned the running backs. But I got to say, if I were to be concerned about anything, it would be the lack of development, or maybe perceived lack of development, about a couple of receivers on the veteran wide receivers. Because everything we've heard about the freshmen, about like Rico Flores and Jane Greathouse, even Braylon James to an extent, has been really positive, which is good. We all agree that those guys have really bright futures at Notre Dame. But, like, I was really hoping we'd start to hear more about Tobias Merriweather, Deion Colsey, making big-time catches, contested catches, going up against Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison. And maybe this is all product of the fact that they have to go against two really good quarterbacks every day in practice, so it's a lot harder to make those plays. But I don't know. I kind of expected to hear a little bit more positive about those guys, but I guess we'll still have to wait and see with them as well.
I agree, especially because we did see Colsey have some moments last year. Then again, I maybe the inconsistency shouldn't shock us as much, given that there were some rumors going into near the end of spring that he might be on his way out the door too. So I don't know where he's at with just, level of preparation, things like that. But I agree, you need more out of him, and that's something you want to see. I hope that for Tobias, it's just a matter of going up against really tough competition, because they need that. And the one thing I will say is that we've said this about pretty much every really good Notre Dame team in the last decade, is that they've kind of just been a quarterback away. And you could probably make the case that Deshaun Kaiser was a very talented quarterback in 2015. Ian Book was obviously really good, but not a guy that could stretch the field or just stretch out the defense. And my hope is that now with Sam Hartman, the receivers can get by guys, and they don't even have to be that special, because he can do things himself to get them open that way and really just stretch the field. So we'll see. I'm excited to see it, but that's just something I'm really hopeful to see.
Yeah, and maybe we're underrating what Jaden Thomas can do as a
Right.
deep ball guy, because recently I was on a YouTube rabbit hole watching Will Fuller highlights, and I was fantasizing about the possibilities if Sam Hartman had Will Fuller to throw to. Like, he'd probably have 20 plus touchdowns
And like 30 plus drops.
Hey, I'll take the drops with the touchdowns, because he was that good. But another thing to consider too with Notre Dame's passing game is Hartman is going to be able to get the ball there, and if the running game is as effective as we think it will be, that's going to open things up even more, because last year we became so used to Notre Dame playing teams who were stacking the box and like, all right, Drew, beat us. And we were so focused on running the ball all the time that a lot of the throws and catches were pretty contested, just because that was the nature of it. Now, defenses might be sucked into that trap where we're kind of running with estimate 4 or 5 yards a play, and then all of a sudden Sam hits him deep. In that situation, it's going to be a little bit easier for guys like Tobias, a little bit easier for like Deion Colsey to get open when the defense just isn't expecting it. And now Notre Dame actually has a quarterback who could take advantage of that.
Exactly. And we just haven't had that. And as we know, in the college football playoff, you have to have a quarterback that can win you a game. I mean, even TCU, yes, I know they lost by 100 to Georgia in that title game. Max Duggan is the reason they won that semifinal game against Michigan.
Yeah.
And so you need a gunslinger like that and somebody who can make things happen. And as much as I think both of us loved Ian Book, and he also had the misfortune of going up against two of the greatest teams in the college football playoff era. He just wasn't quite at that level and didn't probably have quite the playmakers to make that happen. So hopefully Sam Hartman can turn these guys into playmakers and make those things happen.
Max Duggan almost died on the field in the Big 12 championship game when they were running.
He might have. That could have been a clone play.
Do you remember that when he scored that touchdown and they had to drag him off the field and they still lost, and he just broke down at the press conference? I felt so bad for him. He's like, dude, what more could I have done in that situation?
Yeah, nothing except maybe die, and he was pretty close.
All right, last question before I let you go. Would you say that you are more optimistic, less optimistic, or about the same now than you were before fall camp officially started?
So I would say that I'll answer that in a couple ways. From a record perspective, and we'll probably get to that later in a couple weeks as we get closer to the season, which actually I guess that's only 2 weeks away, but you get the point. I feel the same about how I did going into camp. Now, what I do feel a little bit different about is just this team does seem to have a bit of an attitude about it, and they seem to have, there's a belief there that we are just going to kind of knock some people around. Like, you keep hearing words like violence and physicality, and obviously you're going to hear nothing but positive things this time of the year. But when you hear words like that, they kind of stick out a little bit. And I hope that translates to just kind of a nasty team. Now, what I will say is that in turn, hearing stuff like that and kind of feeling that attitude or vibe, and even with Marcus Freeman at practice, stuff like that, it's got me a lot more excited than I was going into camp. It's like, all right, I'm kind of ready to see what this group looks like and how they truly gel on the field.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm about the same. Certainly there's been some positive stuff that we've talked about. The defensive line really stands out to me. But I think I'm more excited than I was, partially because of the stuff that you mentioned, the violence. Obviously, Sam Hartman being the quarterback is going to make it a lot more exciting. And just thinking back to last season, it was just not fun
to watch
Saturdays.
Yeah.
No. I have not had that experience in a long time where on Saturdays
I hated that team.
Just here we go. The UNLV game, I don't know if a game other than the Notre Dame Louisville game in 2020 that just, I was so unenthused. Just, it did not move the needle for me at all. And there were so many games like that last season where I was like, man, even when Notre Dame wins, we can't get excited. It lacked that. And that was a big piece of being a fan that I missed. And look, you're going to lose some games. It happens pretty much every year for every single team. But when you win, at least be fun. And Notre Dame wasn't fun last year. And I think it's going to be a lot different this year.
Yeah. We're not going to name him because I want to be nice to him, but we don't have to watch that guy play quarterback again. And that makes a big difference.
All right, we will leave it at that. He is Luke Smith. You can follow him on Twitter at thatsmith15. We will be doing our annual preseason award show in the next week or so before the Navy game. It's one of my favorite segments we've ever done, and that will probably drop here pretty soon. So be on the lookout for that. But until then, Luke, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every single victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, that's a wrap for this episode of Locked On Irish. Thanks again for making this your first listen of the day. For the everyday listeners of the show, be sure to tune in to tomorrow's episode. I'm going to have Tim Murray, gambling expert, radio host extraordinaire, and also lifelong Notre Dame fan to go over some over-under prop bets for Notre Dame players this season. And then we're going to go over some of the key matchups and some of the early lines we're seeing. And then at the end, we'll get into what we think about Notre Dame's season win total of 8.5. But before you head out, please subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the pod, and follow us on Twitter at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal Twitter account at Tyler WOJCIAK. I'm going to still keep calling it Twitter because I just hate X and everything that Elon has done. But I will see you guys tomorrow.